Welcome back to Killer Fun, where we explore the intersection of crime and entertainment. Every other week, I'm Christy.
And I'm Jackie.
And today, we are back, this time with Dark Winds.
It feels so good to be back.
We really appreciate your patience with
Yes.
our outtakes episode last time. Just, life gets in the way.
Life was lifing, man.
Life was lifing especially hard for you.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have a little option sometimes.
It does. Well, you know what? We talk enough for that.
Yes.
We have a backlog of things. So, yeah, we always have something to pull out.
That's
so that's
right.
Good.
Well, we don't right now, but we will at the end of this
Yes.
episode.
Oh, yeah. By the end of the episode, I promise we'll have plenty enough. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Dark Winds, though.
Yes.
Like, no one knows who the murderer is, but everyone knows to be skeptical, especially of those who purport to be your allies in this show.
Yes.
Like, you are left with suspicions at the end of this and questions, and in the best way. It's really good.
It really is, because it is a bit of a procedural in a way.
Yes,
it has a
but
feel.
but it doesn't follow a formula.
It does not. And it's not necessarily episodic where they're solving one crime and then maybe having an over. No, this is one story. And you know why? I noticed. I was like, ooh, this is going to be good. Like, it's not like I didn't think it was going to be good. The trailer was good. This was what kicked it off for me, is the credits.
No.
George R. Martin. And I was like, sign me up.
With Robert Redford.
Thank you. I'm in. I know that this is bigger. I know it's going somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
And it's very much an AMC style show.
It is.
Where you've got like a continuation of things. It's not like a major network. Not that AMC is not a major network, because it is, but it's not like an ABC, NBC, CBS type.
It's not like
show.
an NCIS.
No,
or
it's
something
not
like that.
Where you can pick it up anywhere, and even if there's little things that you don't get because they continue from episode to episode, you can pick it up and enjoy the show,
which is their model,
right?
Because with live TV,
right,
you might not be able to know anything that happened in season before if you started, but you could start anywhere. So it's funny because when those transfer to streaming, all of a sudden it feels much more redundant, and you're like, why does it feel so redundant? Well, and if you didn't grow up watching live TV, you don't know why I'm saying this, but with the streaming, if you're wondering why these shows feel so redundant, it's because it was live once a week. So new viewers were coming in all the time.
Right.
And they needed to be able to enjoy the episode without getting all of the callbacks and the inside jokes.
Right.
And then as they watched, they would start to pick up on the callbacks and the inside jokes as well.
Right.
And so that was fine when there was a week gap.
Right.
And then when you're back to back, sometimes it's like, wow, that's redundant. Okay, well, but it was not the model.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. They have a format just like we do, and this is how the things work. Yeah. This is a different kind of format.
It is,
but
and
it works got some of the same flavors.
It does.
You can tell it's a procedural, but it's also in the age of, we're going to have a whole season that's 8 to 10 episodes.
Yeah, and it's a whole story.
It is a whole story. It's basically like a 6-hour movie.
It is. But there's also very well designed and timed bathroom breaks.
Yes.
Or refill your cup, whatever you have in that cup breaks. And I appreciate that.
Yes, exactly. Or like, ooh, I'm going to watch this as a treat to myself. And when I get to the end, I'm going to set it aside and move on to the next thing.
Yes. Yes. Or go to sleep. Because I watched it like a binge watch until 1 a.m. or so.
Yeah, so Jackie has watched more Dark Winds than I have.
I have 2 episodes left in the first season. So I'm anxious to watch the rest. It's going to be good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this cast.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's so good. And I got to really give them a lot because there is so much Native American, Indigenous peoples, First Nations people involvement in this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, a ton. So the director of this first episode is Chris Eyre. He is a Native person. The creator made for TV person.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because we'll talk about how it came to be a little later. Graham Rowland.
Right.
Native American. The Writer's Room. I really appreciate this. Just filled with Native Americans. Anthony Flores, Erica Tremblay, Roselle Bentley, Maya Rose Ditloff, Billy Luther, all of these people.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So all behind the scenes, cast and crew, like a lot of representation and like really being able to kind of own this story.
Well, and that's the thing. It doesn't come across as some sort of like performative or I don't know, value signaling or whatever. It's the show is so authentic that it really they are doing the show.
Yes.
And it's clear and it's authentic and it's accessible though.
Right.
For anybody.
Right.
It's great.
Exactly. This is like the absolute like best of the we're going to involve the kind of people who would share a history with these characters and make it feel great. And the actors.
So good.
Zahn McLaren is Joe Leaphorn, the tribal police lieutenant.
Yes, I've always loved him. Anything he's in is great. He's always good.
Yes. He's a little bit typecast as law enforcement.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
so,
he is.
Yes. So he was in Chief of the Tribal Indian Police in Longmire, Fargo Season 2, Timeless, and Reservation Dogs, which was so funny.
That was a wild show.
I mean, but he was kind of a bumbling police officer in that one, but like in this most endearing way. And but he's a little typecast other than he was the leader of the Ghost Nation in Westworld.
I didn't really watch it, but yeah.
Kyle Gordon is Jim Chi, the law enforcement officer who we find out at the end of the episode is also working for the FBI.
Yes.
He's probably best known because he was Embry in the Twilight Saga.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he fit right along the rest of that beautiful tribe.
Jessica Matten is Bernadette Manuelito, the female tribal police officer.
Also excellent on screen.
Yes. She was in a show called Tribal, Burden of Truth, done lots of things. Jeremiah Bitsui is Hoseki, the Navajo priest.
Yes.
Yeah. So not a lot of people taking the Jesus road anymore.
I love that line.
I love that too. It was really.
And they didn't say not a lot of Danae. They said a lot of people. That was funny.
It was funny. He looks really familiar because he was Victor in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul.
Oh, I did look this up.
Yeah, he was
and I was like, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? I know you. I know you."
Because you've watched him in Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad.
Why? Yes.
Yep.
That's him.
Another very familiar face is Noah Emmerich as Leland Witover, the FBI agent.
Yes.
He was in The Walking Dead. The Truman Show.
Oh,
my husband was like, "What do I know him from?" Oh, The Truman Show. That's it.
From everything. He's been in everything.
Yeah. He's been in a ton of stuff. He's been around forever.
My whole life.
Yeah.
He's been around my whole life, and I love that guy.
Yeah.
I love that guy.
Yeah. Deanna Allison is Emma Leaphorn. She doesn't have a lot of credits to her name because she's kind of new to acting. And she has previously worked as an animation intern for the DC universe.
Yeah, so she's making a big shift.
I'm like, good for her. And then Elva Guerrera is Sally Growing Thunder, and she was in Reservation Dogs.
Yeah, and she's good.
So she's so good.
Yeah.
She has got the angsty teen who is both too smart for her own good and annoyed by the entire world down pat.
Yes.
She's perfect for this.
Yes. If we ever do a remake of Daria, we need to call her.
Yeah.
Because she would nail it.
Yeah, she would. Big time. All right, so shall I recap?
Oh my gosh, recap this.
Okay. Crime 1, robbery of an armored car. Crime 2, theft of artifacts from a native land. Crime 3, 2 indigenous people are murdered in a motel. The FBI is most concerned with the first crime, and the tribal police officer, Lieutenant Joe Leaphorn, is most concerned with crime number 3, the murders, which you would think.
Yeah.
There's push and pull in every community. The tribal police are distrustful of the FBI. The FBI are distrustful of the tribal police and any Native American custom or belief that they find unusual in any way. The people of the tribe living on the reservation don't trust the FBI or the tribal police or any medical professional or almost anyone outside of their immediate circle, inside or outside of the tribe, for reasons that actually make a lot of sense.
Yep.
We're left with far more questions than answers at the end of this episode. And we're just beginning to understand that the people and groups behind these crimes are deeply obscured.
It's wild.
It is wild.
Okay, it's a period piece, right? So we're talking, it was the 70s.
Right, early 70s.
So, first of all, they nail it. With the period piece.
Yes.
What's so really amazing is that before being a procedural in the modern era, they really avoided tropes that would be common to modern day investigation techniques and modern day strategy and all of that. And they really, because I kept thinking, why aren't they doing this thing? Oh, because it was the 70s.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they are holding fast to it. So it felt very realistic in the 70s. Yeah. And I thought that was really, that's hard.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's talking about DNA in this.
No.
Because it was not a thing yet.
It was not a thing yet. And honestly, like the morgue situation, like all the things that they did, like the sets, everything is so real. I love it.
Yeah. Thoughts? I had some.
Man, hit me.
So the armored car robbers escape in a helicopter. And I really could not decide if this was genius or misguided. Because it's misguided because it's super memorable. But it's genius because that getaway was fast.
And it's the 70s.
It was so swift.
How are they tracking this?
Yeah.
Are they going to open flight aware?
No.
And then track some unknown aircraft?
Right.
No.
No.
They have no idea. All they knew was it flew north.
They're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
nothing tracking this freaking aircraft.
No.
Nothing.
I mean, there was nothing tracking the armored vehicle, to be fair.
Nothing tracking the armored vehicle. Nothing tracking. There's no general, like when you think of like the radar system at large, the ability to track all aircraft. Nope. And they flew low.
They did. They flew real low.
Any radar we did have that overlaps. But I mean, in the 70s, pilots of major commercial airlines were still using the big milestone things in the ground.
Yeah. They were looking out their window. Like, oh, I see the thing. I know I need to turn.
Only the largest jets at that point had, more technology. But a lot of commercial aircraft was smaller still. And they were still using which are so cool. I love those things.
And it was rural native lands.
Yeah.
They're not like, they saw no reason to extend their technology over these areas.
No. And I mean, the helicopter was small.
It was a little. Yeah. So Joe Leaphorn gives the guy the business about the stolen artifacts. I'm like, this is a problem. Just ask every civilization represented in the British Museum. I'll take every opportunity to call it the British Museum for their BS.
Yes.
It's revealed that the tribal police are using hollow point bullets, and the new guy is surprised.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, is this protection from wildlife or people? Wonder which one they were more worried about.
I think they were more worried about their lack of aim because nobody in local police were trained that well.
That's fair.
I got very practical about that. I was like, unless you're like, funny enough, unless you're like the FBI or something, you're not getting training that's going to make you that accurate.
We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Yeah, we might.
The 27,000 square miles. That's so much for 50 tribal police officers to cover.
Inconceivable.
I mean, it's so much.
America is so big.
It is. It's huge.
It's just so big.
Right. And I mean, they talk about like, make sure you have water.
Oh, I know.
Because you could go missing and we won't miss you for a while.
Yeah, because the communications were certainly limited to the walkies.
Yeah.
And that range, which were pretty powerful. I mean, we're talking about ham radio, kind of thing. So we're getting far, but still quite limited.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea that the indigenous community has a belief that the talk of witchcraft will invite more death, even if they know something, they're kind of unlikely to talk about it to police for this reason. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But there's something deep here that I can't quite put my finger on. It's like, is it ignore a problem and it goes away? Is it starve the bad things of attention so they wither and die? Or is it like a tactic to keep people from talking? I'm like, there's something about it, and I just can't quite decide what it is. And maybe further down, I'll have more. No,
I'm like nodding. I'm not really shaking my head.
Yeah.
I think, no, you're onto something. I think as we look at the evolution of societies, right? We have a tendency to when we have studies and research, to allow that to dictate our entire perspective. Right. And to say, oh, well, you had this idea, but now we have shown in research that this is what was really happening. And I think that's the fight that occurs later on, is that there's a bit of pull between the people who have done the research or been a part of that or learned and kind of can say, okay, I'm a psychologist. I'm looking at that. Like, all three could be true. The last one could be true because somebody manipulates it.
Right.
Right. So, the others could be very much an issue of coping, but maybe not so healthy, because we know that when you talk about things, you've actually diminished their power.
Right.
So it is hard because I want to prescribe that. But they're actually talking about supernatural.
Right. And so, even that, like, that makes me, it's like, ooh.
If I take their perspective, though, then none of the research matters if I'm talking about something supernatural. And that is the fight right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, I don't know. It was a thing that I thought. I was a little interesting.
I was a little worried about the show, though. I was a little worried it would get a little colonized.
Yeah.
That we might see these practices and that have some...
somebody come in and
kind of explain it.
Yeah, let poo on your thousands of years of.
It's not like I didn't think it immediately.
Yeah,
because of my job, like in psychology, I thought it immediately. I'm like, oh, I see what's happening here, but I had to take a step back and go,
Well, and it doesn't have to be only one of those things. It can be all of those things. It can be, this is culturally how we handle it, and this is why we believe that. And then there's also somebody outside seeing that and manipulating that, encouraging that in order to keep people quiet.
Yeah. And there can be others who are identifying a pattern of human behavior, and that's all psychology is. Is we're studying the mind and behavior and experience. That's all.
Right.
So, like, I can describe it in clinical terms. What I can't do is validate it because it's valid already.
Right. Exactly. So Jim makes a crime scene connection that the FBI couldn't have made. And that was like, this is why it's so important for law enforcement to work with communities, particularly if that particular officer is not a member of that community, whether it's Indigenous people or any community that the law enforcement officer isn't a part of, because they're going to have some beliefs or cultural things that happen within their area, even if it's just a small area, like a little part of town. Like, this is the way we do things here.
Yeah.
You know, it's so important to recognize that people can help you find those connections that you would have otherwise missed. And Officer Manuelito wants to talk to Sally, and the woman who answers the door claims too quickly that Sally doesn't live there.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, why is the quick answer so suspicious? I can't put my finger on it, because, like, it seems like if she would pause just a moment, no, she doesn't live here.
Yeah, it would be true.
It would be no big deal. It would have been like, it might have been believable, but she answered so fast.
Yeah, she didn't live here.
Yeah, like,
it's defensive.
It is.
And because it's defensive, we know, why do you feel attacked?
Yeah. Because you're lying.
Because, every defensive answer is basically a confession of something that you are afraid of being accused of. And it may be something else. Might be some third thing, some confound or whatever, but likely maybe we're right.
So the filming locations, this was filmed on location. It's so beautiful. Wide Open Country has an article about all of these filming locations, and they say the scenery is as much of a character in the show as any human. And I'm like, it is
true.
Is fair. So the filming did take place in New Mexico, the Navajo Nation. Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park is part of it. Santa Fe is like the city that they used. Cayenta is a small Arizona town of about 5,000 people. The gateway to Monument Valley. And then Tiknos Pass, which is located on the Navajo Nation reservation. And it's like a little small trading post. And Camel Rock Studios. So it was primarily filmed on location, but the production studio is the first ever Native American owned film and television studio.
That's awesome.
So it's great. I really love like how this is, even though the story is fictional. We'll get there. I'll ask you that later.
I feel like I was going to get that one right.
Yeah, I feel like you were too. I like to try and have resources.
Yes, we try to link it to something that's helpful.
Right.
We're talking about some heavy stuff sometimes.
So yeah, but this isn't so heavy, but it is important. We see it the first time we see Joe Lee porn is artifacts.
Yeah, artifacts.
The National Park Service has information that if you find an artifact.
Ooh, okay.
So what is an archaeological artifact is things that were made by people in the past, that they changed the area or they left it behind where they lived and worked. That's what it is. So if you find one, leave it alone.
Leave it.
Don't pick it up and take it with you. Don't touch it if you once you realize what it is. If you realize it, if you find a little shard of pottery or something, you might not realize until you pick it up that that's what it is. But put it back where you found it. Document the location. Take a picture of it. Step back and take a picture with some kind of landmark so that it's more easily found. And don't put it on social media.
Oh.
I know.
Can you at least take a selfie for posterity?
Well, certainly you want to tell a park ranger about it, because if you put it on social media, then there's the chance that somebody who has a less goodwill than you do is going to go looking for it. So you
keep
definitely
your pictures private.
Keep your pictures private. At least take your picture with it for posterity. Take a picture in that area and say, I had a great visit. But don't say, I found cool stuff.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. Which I know is a bummer, but
it is a bummer. We like finding treasure.
I know.
It is treasure. They call it artifacts. It's treasure.
It is treasure.
Love it.
Exactly.
The archaeologists get to keep it. Just kidding.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
So taking an artifact off of federal land is illegal.
Right.
So there's some gray areas about privately owned land. And if you see someone else removing artifacts or defacing rocks or rock images, because sometimes there's things painted or carved into rocks, see somebody defacing that or using a metal detector on federal land, tell a park ranger. It's important.
Yes.
If you have come into possession of recently or long ago something that may have been taken from federal land or that is a tribal artifact that you feel like you need to return, then there are ways to do that. So, depending on how they found, now mostly what they're interested in is human remains, funerary objects, and ceremonial objects.
Right.
They're less concerned with like hunting weapons and things like that, because those would have a tendency to get left behind and lost. They don't have this like major cultural significance.
A little dilution in the value of them.
Right. So what they're mostly worried about is remains. That's the top priority. And then there's other things. So Department of Interior does have a whole list of tribal leaders. So if you know where the item came from, you can look up the leaders in that area and send them pictures and let them know that you have this. You think it might belong to them. Would they like it back?
Right.
As of January of 2024, there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States.
Right.
So... yeah, and just because there's a market for something doesn't mean that it should be bought or sold. There is a market for these things. The government does watch eBay for when these things are going up to be sold, and they do shut that down. So don't sell the items. If you have them and they're not a funerary object or a ceremonial object or human remains, I think you're probably mostly in the clear, but don't try and sell it on eBay because you will get in trouble for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's how it works. Christy wrecks her search history. Hey, NSA, we promise it's nothing more nefarious than a podcast. To find out what's true, some of the psychological motivations behind the characters' actions, and real-life applications that relate to our topic. I have no idea what Christy decided to look up. Could be the same thing that captured my curiosity or something I never thought of.
Is it true?
No.
No, it's not. So I say it's not true, but it's honest.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I thought that was a good way to talk about it. So it's adapted from a book written in the late 70s, which is fictional, by Tony Hillerman. And he deeply rooted these things in the history of what was happening with the indigenous people.
Yeah.
He did have a heart for it, but he was a white man who wrote these. And so when they decided that they were going to adapt this, that's why it was so important to fill the writer's room with indigenous people.
Okay.
To make sure that to use indigenous actors and have indigenous people in the writer's room, the directorial staff, the production company, all the studio is all of these people are coming together to give this fictionalization an honest flavor to it.
Yeah, to get the right perspective, to catch the right language, the lexicon, all
right.
the things.
Yes, all of that, and I think it really came through.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. So Monument Valley is, of course, real. It's a real place.
Real place.
And you can really visit there.
You can go.
And it's super cool. It has hiking trails. They're fairly short. There's one called the Wildcat Trail that's only 1.5 miles long. But here's what I really appreciate about it. You have to sign in and sign out. So they make sure that they don't lose anybody.
Yeah, that's good.
And then they also have a scenic drive. It's, the hours are shorter in the or in the winter than in the summer because the less daylight or whatever. And they have certain times, like in the summer, you can't enter after 4:30 p.m. because it will get dark. And it's a 17-mile scenic loop.
Okay. Nice.
You probably want to have a fairly rugged vehicle. They don't allow RVs to go on it.
Okay.
So it may not be completely paved.
Right. So maybe at least 4x4.
Beautiful. You can go there. And they do have permits for longer hiking. But they want to know that you're there. And then special use permits. So if you want to go out there and paint or do filming or photography for professional sorts of things, then you need special permits for that, but they're available. You can do that sort of thing.
So cool.
Tribal police.
Of
course they're real.
Yes, real.
Of course they're real. They've been around since the early 1800s, and they were primarily to combat horse theft at that time. Today, they work really closely with local, state, and federal agencies. Typically, they're going to have the primary jurisdiction, but it depends on what kind of crime it is.
Right.
Speaking of which, the FBI has information about what kind of crimes they will look at when they're on tribal land.
Okay.
They have special jurisdiction on about 200 reservations nationwide.
Okay.
So, but those have to be They have to meet conditions.
I was curious about this because he said something. He said something. And I was like, really?
So, and I believe that this has changed.
Yeah.
So like it's hard to find when these things change because, you know, when you make a mistake, like really like what was happening here, where you like just, if there's a murder, we're going to take it over. No ifs, ands, or buts. And obviously they did not have the correct background to be able to successfully navigate these sorts of situations.
No.
So the conditions are the investigation must be predicated on a criminal act for which the FBI has jurisdictions. The FBI would have to be able to investigate this other places as well. Primarily, there are a few situations where the FBI wouldn't normally investigate, like in the country at large, that they will assist in the investigations on tribal land.
Okay.
The crime has to have occurred on a reservation where the FBI has jurisdiction, and the subject, victim, or both must be Native American.
Okay.
So either the perpetrator or the victim or both should be of the group. Now, the Violence Against Women's Act definitely is giving the tribes the ability to be able to research more. So missing and murdered Indigenous women is a huge problem. The Violence Against Women Act allows them to get more support from the FBI to try and solve these things.
Well, that's good.
It is.
None of it's good. But you know what I mean?
It's not good. It's good that they can get the help they need. It's not good that they ignored it for many, many decades.
Yeah, no, it's not good.
No.
You know, we be fixing things.
Yes.
We're constantly trying to fix things.
That's right. Better. That's what all the best we can hope for usually.
Better, yeah.
Yeah. So Sergeant Manuelito is in law enforcement, a woman.
I know.
In the early 70s.
I noticed this. I made comments of this. These were part of some of my thoughts. I was like, interesting.
Yes. Like, I was like, oh, that's good. And not only is she a law enforcement officer, she's like higher ranking.
The number 2. Yeah.
Yeah. She's not just like a person who's like happens to work there. She's like in a position of power. So the history of law enforcement, women in law enforcement, briefly, because there's a lot. The first known appointed policewoman was in 1890 in Chicago. Her name was Marie Owens. The first sworn female police officer was in Portland, Oregon in 1908, Lola Baldwin. The first appointed LAPD officer who was African American was in 1916, Georgia Ann Robinson. LAPD also had the first known Latina policewoman in 1946. So I really appreciate these like coming in. The first elected female sheriff was in Pittsburgh, North Carolina in 1920, the first year that women had the right to vote in the United States.
Interesting.
And then in 1972, Tanya Paget, Martha Parks, and Tommy Stewart were the first sworn in as full police officers in Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of the first cities to take this step after employment law change in 1972 made it illegal for police departments to discriminate on the basis of gender. Before 1972, they could say, you're a woman, you can't be a police officer. So she was like kind of on the leading edge here.
Yep.
So Joe Leaphorn says to Jim G that he went to college to avoid the draft.
Yeah.
Did this happen?
Well, people did this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, they did.
Absolutely, they did.
We're going to talk about that a little bit because Berkeley University did a study back in February of 2002 looking at what did this mean. There was this college attendance rates among specifically young men really did rise in the early, mid, late 60s and early 70s.
Yep.
And they were able to look at the data and see that college attendance rates by young men rose 4 to 6 percentage point in the late 60s. And they adjusted for like the population growth, right? Like they did adjust for that, and they compared it to similar rates for women. So of course, more women were going to college than had in previous generations, but they adjusted for that. They adjusted for population. They adjusted for these other factors that might increase it. And they really did see a huge rise in college attendance during the time of the draft.
Yeah.
It's difficult to say that is only a correlation because of how significant it is. And after the draft changed, and then more so after the draft ended, they fell back down. College attendance fell back down to where they would expect to have seen it.
Yeah.
When they adjusted for population growth and
all of the things. Yeah, I mean, right?
Right. So,
I mean, like, yeah.
So you have these men who, went to college either because they wanted to go to college or because they were trying to avoid the draft, because it was basically as long as you were making positive progress towards any degree, you could avoid the draft that way. So you have people maybe in the early 60s or mid 60s who were quote unquote avoiding the draft, who would have still been in draftable age by the time they finished college. So they saw a huge jump in medical school applications.
Yeah.
All the way up through graduate schools of all different types and PhDs, that because healthcare providers were given a special dispensation, that really drove a lot of people into all types, nursing, dentistry, medical doctors, surgeons, all of these things. So we had a huge group of doctors come from that era, which I realized after the fact. I was thinking about when my kid's pediatrician retired. Like, he absolutely
was part of this.
Part of this. Now, he was an excellent physician. He was what he should have done. I don't know that he did it, but he was in the age range where he definitely would have. And of course, we've seen kind of a decline because healthcare is so demanding and stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a bucket of worms.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, we've seen a fall off, but all of these people who went to medical school to avoid the draft are retiring.
Yeah.
They're no longer...
Yeah, they're not practicing.
We're no longer practicing. So we're left with this deficit of baby boomers who were in the medical field.
And it's interesting because at that time they would have come up and they would have, because of the numbers, because of the likelihood of them all being white males, you could see how it drives the perspective of Western medical care.
Right.
Because it expanded so much that there was this very narrow view of medical care. And then we had all of the other factors that get in the way. So
yes,
I won't talk about because it's
like no studies on women,
like no studies on women, like insurance, like all of these like mindsets of like stabilize and transfer. Like, it's really interesting out there.
Then there's a whole bunch of stuff about how selective service was different then and now. I'll have that on our social media.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about it today, but Joe calls FBI agent Woodover high pockets.
Yeah,
and he does not like it.
I was like, I don't understand this. I don't know what high pockets is.
Okay,
so I'm excited for you to tell me.
Yes, it was a derogatory slang term that really came from the World War II generation.
Okay,
greatest generation people, and basically what it meant was that there were a lot of men, typically white men, who were in positions of power, and they would wear high-waisted pants. And so their pockets were up high, but they had an outsized power for what they were actually doing. Like they weren't really contributing, but they were like standing over people, like telling them to do their job differently, even though they weren't actually doing much of anything.
I'm going to have to go ahead and ask you to, just come on in the weekend.
I was thinking Office
Cue
Space.
Office Space, yeah.
Yes, like
Immediately.
the boss in Office Space was absolutely a high pockets.
That's funny. Oh, but wearing them up high. Golden Girls has a little scene about that where he's talking about like, oh, he wears his pants up to his nipples. And then Rose says, that doesn't bother me. It just looks so uncomfortable.
That's fair. And then unrelated, there was a silent movie in 1919 that was called High Pockets, but I couldn't find that it had anything to do with it really.
Interesting.
But it was out there. It came up when I did the Google search.
Okay. How about that?
So I mentioned this in the thoughts section. The tribal police officers tell the FBI agents that the locals are unlikely to talk, even if they know something,
right?
Primarily because of superstition. And that seems to be very much a true thing, according to alivehospice.org in the Navajo Nation and the Apache Nation specifically.
Okay.
They fear the ghosts of the deceased because they believe them to resent the living.
Interesting.
Some tribes will see the ancestral spirits as there to support them and lend aid. We saw that in Reservation Dogs, which we haven't talked about on the show other than that we've watched it, but it was kind of a reoccurring theme that was very funny. And that this is from a National Institute of Health article. American Indians' experiences of life-threatening illnesses and end of life. So they do find that they have a hard time giving end-of-life care like hospice care to some indigenous cultures because they feel like speaking the words of death could invite the evil spirits and make them fearful. And so that is a struggle that they're trying to make sure that these people have good end-of-life care, that they've got the care to be comfortable with hospice, because hospice it's much more than just like a mental thing and support for the family. It's also about keeping you comfortable.
It's very important actually. And it's funny because going to palliative care, so Oswald Gwande in the book I mentioned on Being Mortal. So, and clearly this is kind of more tribe specific, but he mentions that research had shown that palliative care, people who chose palliative care on average live longer than those who continue to fight. And they live a better quality of life.
Right.
So it's very interesting because that's the role of stress.
Right.
And I can't stress it enough. Stress is not good. Distress is not good.
Right.
And so fighting can be such distress, and then you make yourself more vulnerable to complications that sometimes it's funny how just supporting you gives you a better
outcome.
Yeah.
So that doctor in the clinic tells the young pregnant woman, Sally, that babies move less at the end of pregnancy because they run out of room.
Okay. He said that, and I was like, that means she's past her due date. That means we're losing amniotic fluid. And that means in today's world, we are going to go get the baby.
Yeah.
Right? Like when I was pregnant and we went through these classes, and I was at Beth Israel in Boston. Okay. So like it was a really great hospital, and they had a class for pregnant women who would be coming in soon, Yeah. And so people were worried, like, what if I'm trying to have this baby and something goes wrong? Like people were asking the questions, and finally the physician was like a little stressed about it. And she finally looked at all of us and says, listen, if I want your baby, I'll have him in 5 minutes. And you won't have a choice about it. I'll save you. I'll save your baby. Clear? And everybody went like, thank you.
Yeah.
This is what we needed to hear, is that if you have to make the call, you can do it. And she was like, I got it. So, but when he said that, I was like, it's like, it's Caesarean time.
Yeah.
So you're lying.
Well, or he was just uninformed. They had different ideas in the early 70s, maybe, but that is completely wrong. The idea that, according to Healthline, that the idea that your baby runs out of room is erroneous. You should be feeling them move. Maybe they're not going to do the big movements, but they're going to be moving around in there.
Oh, you should feel if they're running out of room, that means they are kicking your ribs. Okay. They are stomping on your bladder.
They're making it
they're
so you cannot
literally
breathe.
probably twerking against your spine. Okay. So like you feel that. You feel that. So if the baby is not moving and we don't feel the baby moving, this is a problem.
Yes, exactly. But
But that scene continues.
Yes, and you know what's coming next.
Yes, I do.
The translator told the young woman she should not have her baby at the clinic because they would sterilize her. This is
Absolutely true.
In the 1970s, article from Rochester University. In the 1970s, doctors in the United States sterilized an estimated 25 to 42% of Native American women of childbearing age, some as young as 15.
I'm so angry.
I mean, it's awful. And I said Rochester University. It's actually the University of Rochester.
Okay.
Because Brianna Theobald is an assistant professor there, and she did this interview talking about it because she wrote a book about reproduction on the reservation. Yeah, the government subsidized these sterilizations and often did them without consent.
Yeah.
Now, some of them were consented to, but they were also coerced.
Yeah, like we have to question whether that was a true consent or not.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, this was the same time as the assimilation camps, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yes, sterilizations on Navajo reservations doubled between 1972 and 1978. They made it seem like it was this great new technology for birth control, and really it was about limiting the size of the population. Really, and this changed dramatically after the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare adopted new regulations that went into effect in 1979. And they only did that because there was a group called the Women of All Red Nations, called themselves WARN, that really took up the mantle of saying this is inappropriate and you should not be doing this. And finally, it took them too long to adjust their regulations.
It's maddening.
It really is. It's so frustrating. So we do learn, as I mentioned, that Jim Chi is working for the FBI as an agent with Widover. They're talking about this theft and was it possibly caused by a reactionary organization. Jim suggests that it might be AIM. Is AIM real?
I didn't know. And I really didn't look it up, but it sounded like maybe adapted from real life situations.
Oh.
And so...
You're so astute. Because AIM is real. It's the American Indian movement that began in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the summer of 1968.
Okay.
And they caught the attention of the FBI because they were combative and willing to use some force to get their message heard. I don't know that anybody would have been able to hear them if they had not used some force. The Wounded Knee, South Dakota, had a big altercation in February of 1973, but the leaders of the American Indian movement were later acquitted of any wrongdoing after an 8-month trial. So that tells you something about the situation that was happening up there. However, the Buffalo Society, which is the one that they actually are attributing this theft to, is fictional, created by Tony Hillerman. It was a way of him being able to relate it to AIM, but not put any fictional deviousness on a real organization.
Right.
So they were more, Buffalo Society was more militant, more incendiary. So he was able to take some artistic license by creating a fictional organization.
Makes total sense.
Yeah. All of the sources that we use to inform our discussion here on Killer Fun Podcast can be found on our social media. Join us on Facebook at Killer Fun Podcast, exploring the intersection of crime and entertainment. You can find us on Twitter at Killer Fun Pod, or you can send us an email at killerfunpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to share a link to whatever information you're looking for. We love to hear from you. You might learn a little something too. Psychology break.
Ooh.
So Lester, the tourist shop proprietor, said that spending time with the indigenous people colored his beliefs. Mm-hmm. Other people do have a lot of influence on our belief systems, maybe a lot more than we realize.
Oh, don't they though? Oh, I have so many.
Yes. Behavioralscience.org has an article about this, how other people influence you and why that's okay. Ilaria Schlitz is writing an article about a book by Jonah Berger, Invisible Influence, The Hidden Forces That Shape Behavior. Professor Berger is at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. They talk about how we can see behaviors of others influencing other people. Mm-hmm. But we have a hard time seeing how other people's behaviors influence us.
Yep.
That we have like a bias and a blind spot.
Oh, yeah.
We think we're immune. We are not.
Bless our hearts.
Yeah, exactly. And because we're unaware that we're being influenced, it makes it difficult to correct for that influence. Mm-hmm. However, we say that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, but there is a pro-social aspect to this.
He says the most interesting question is not if we can correct against it in social influence, but should we?
Right. Mm-hmm.
There are bad things that influence us, but it also helps us. Even just like looking at reviews on Yelp, mm-hmm. you can make a decision faster and better because of where you're going to go eat for dinner because you've been able to look at the social influence.
Yeah, polling the group, right? Or we poll the group.
That's
and
right.
We say, and we get a better answer. We get more information on the table. Mm-hmm. Like we are primed so much.
Right.
We are primed in ways where somebody else's behavior doesn't directly impact our behavior. Like it's not like, oh, this person does, behavior A, therefore we do. It's they do behavior A, and that primes our mind to be thinking about something. Mm-hmm. And so behavior C over here ends up being the outcome because we're primed. And then we put that alongside our own motivations and needs and all of this. And then, we're shaped.
Uh-huh.
We're truly
and we
shaped.
don't even notice it.
No, there's so many ways that we do this as a group, where we, if you've ever been somewhere and heard a loud noise and everybody turns to look and then all of a sudden you're in the same situation with everybody else. We have that ability. And for the younger ones or who are coming up, they see this happen and they realize, aha, I'm supposed to do with the group. I'm supposed to attend to this thing. And,
either I'm supposed to go towards it or I'm supposed to leave it. Now, you're going to have some groups, because of their social influence, who are going to run towards a thing, and other groups, because of their social influence, are going to run away from it.
Yep.
And you're going to do one or the other because of how
you work
your
as a group.
social influence is.
Yeah, it's so much bigger than people think. People think that we are so individualistic in America because we are an individualistic country. Mm-hmm. That's our culture.
Right.
But
but
we're not.
Okay, but our culture is individualistic because of social influence.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
that's the funny part.
Yes.
That's the irony of it. But it does mean that compared to other cultures, we have more people who are breaking the mold, who will rebel against norms at least.
Right.
They may not be able to pinpoint some of those ways that we are influenced through priming and through the influences that we cannot see, and then the implicit biases that might be related to that. They may not, but they can break the mold in many ways. And so that's why we have that dream, that idea, the archetype story of the redemption.
Right.
Right. The underdog. This is uniquely sort of Western,
Right.
uniquely sort of an individualistic idea, because the idea is you should be taking care of you.
Right.
And that gives you opportunity. And so seize it, you know, and that's here. You know?
Yeah.
It's not other places. Not so much.
Right. And we learned that because of the influence of social interactions with other people within our culture.
Over and over again.
Hilarious.
We learned it because of the rebels. Right?
Right.
But you know, if you look at other cultures, I mean, obviously individualism versus collectivism is on a bit of a spectrum, you know, but yeah, our country is founded by rebels who wanted more rules.
Yeah.
What? That didn't, what? So that, and therefore individualistic is born, right? Like, oh, look, a paradox. What a nice breeding ground.
Exactly.
You know, and it's been great. There's been some great things that came of that. Right. There's some freedom that's been given to people who are of collectivist cultures who, you know, individuals who didn't quite fit the mold now have an opportunity to maybe migrate to another culture and really expand beyond what they could have had they been sort of, in their view, burdened by the tasks and duties of a very collectivist society, you know, because we're becoming more global.
Right.
It's all starting to mix together.
Yeah.
It's good. As long as we make it good. Don't screw it up.
So I thought this was interesting. Antonia Dodge wrote a blog for Personality Hacker. Truth is in the eye of the beholder.
Oh,
I'm like, what is even really truth and reality? Because all of that is also dictated by our social interactions and our social influence. It's not to say that there isn't an objective reality, because there is, but how you interpret it is actually reality. Right?
Yeah.
For you, and it has to do with not only your physical senses, but your conditioning, your belief system, and even your personality type can dictate how you see something. So whereas somebody sees a situation as threatening, other people may not see it that way. And that is partly because of their social influence.
Partly.
And it can also have to do with your brain chemistry and all
your
these
hormones
different things.
and your and your experiences, the schemas you've built over time.
Yes. I just thought it was interesting.
It's very it's one of those things like now we say your truth and my truth, and it drives people crazy. And I'm like, well, it may not be as elegant as that, but you know, it's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not to say that there isn't an objective truth about some facts, but the way you understand them may be different than somebody else. And that can also be okay. Also be really annoying.
Right.
And also be manipulated by some people who have ill will.
Right. Yeah, it can be. And it's very difficult to live with that.
And then memory and our beliefs are also really complexly connected. Again, because these experiences that you have and a situation you find yourself in. So Collab Fund had a blog, Why Do People Believe the Things That They Do? Morgan Housel wrote this, and she talks about the story of this father in Yemen who had lost a child to starvation and had another child become very ill. And in desperation, because he was very poor, he subjected this ill child to a kind of horrific procedure. And he said, when you have no money and your son is sick, you'll believe anything.
Yeah.
He was desperate, and how much you want something to be true will influence how much you believe it.
Yeah. It's hard.
It is hard because, like, you know, that had this dad not been in a situation that was untenable, dire, they didn't see a way out of it, he would have looked at this and said, how could anybody do that? But because he wanted to believe it, and he wanted to believe that this procedure was going to help his child, he did.
He did.
Yeah. Our brains will sometimes find reality too difficult to bear, so it will distort it until we can find it bearable.
Yeah, like
Just
we're trying
really
to fit it to our schemas, and you know, it's hard because, that can happen on small levels that are kind of benign and very sensitive levels, but our growth mindset can be challenged. And so that's why adopting a growth mindset and really training your brain to stay curious and stay open and all of that is helpful. But at the end of the day, yeah, absolutely. Our brains, if we find something completely irrational, it takes us time to like figure out what. And most of the time, a lot of times for a lot of people, that is only time to shut down.
Yes. And that's exactly what they're saying. Memories of past events get filtered. So you keep what makes sense to you.
Yep.
And things that are confusing or don't make sense to you for whatever reason, you just ignore those. They get tossed out. We're going to keep the things that make sense to us. That's kind of what our brains do when there's things that happen in a situation. You're like, that is confusing to me. And you don't have either the bandwidth or the ability to understand it. You will just ignore it.
Right. Or you make it an enemy. Right. The evolutionary perspective is we don't understand that. Therefore, it's not safe. Right. And if I don't have the ability, bandwidth to determine whether it's safe, then the safest option for me is to call it an enemy. And that's where we get, that kind of grew over time from a kind of practical analysis of your environment. Over time, we see groups who dehumanize other people, make them an enemy.
Sure.
Because they can't understand them. And we see this happen in the show.
Right.
The racism is like off the chain. And it's so hard to sit there and watch it because I'm watching the interaction. And I don't even realize I have some expectations about how this dialogue's going to go because, it's not my first time watching TV. So I got some ideas about it. And then they say something stupid and I'm like, what? This is where you chose to go? And then I'm like, oh yeah, authentic to the 70s. Oh God.
Yeah.
And I have to go through that process like multiple times because these people say the most awful, ignorant crap. And you're just like, oh my gosh, you make your life so hard.
Yeah.
But this is like kind of the othering. I don't understand you. I don't have the tools to understand you as far as I think so. And so therefore I have othered you and one-on-one, I may not treat you like you're a threat. But I'm putting up walls just in case.
Okay.
Right? Like I'm not going to let you in.
And I'm not going to seek to understand you.
Because that's like unsafe. And it's like,
well, and they talk about, it's interesting that you call it the othering because you can even do that with your own belief system is that you are presented with information that challenges what you already believe.
Yes.
You're faced with the idea that something you believe might be false, and that is a threat. And so people will refuse to change their mind. Entrenchment, we've talked about that before, because the idea that they were so wrong about being racist towards the indigenous people is threatening to their humanity as they understand it.
Right.
And
their
so,
entire identity, everything they understand, their whole world flips. That's why like implicit bias. Okay. So like Harvard has a implicit attitude test that you can go take. It's free. It's online. And the thing is that we have to remember that these implicit attitudes and biases that we have aren't necessarily prejudice.
Right.
Right. They are built on your familiarity. Right. They can be influenced by like your, not being familiar, the fear, whatever. They can be influenced by social norms. I'm not really sure. Or I've just never been exposed, or I'm afraid of becoming that because something about that hits deep. Right. And so a lot of these implicit biases, they're preferences. We have to remember they're a preference, not a prejudice.
Oh, okay.
And so in that mind, it's so hard because then you have somebody who has a severe preference. And you have to remember they didn't intend that to be prejudiced, but the adverse impact is that it's prejudiced.
Right.
And so how do you talk to somebody who never intended to be that way and have empathy for it while also explaining that their impact absolutely affects other people in negative ways, oppression and hurtfulness and exclusion and othering. And it's hard because now you're talking about their very identity. It's hard to talk about perception that way.
It is. And it's hard to see people refuse to grow.
It is, and that's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
it's fearful.
But growth is painful sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I think that's why part of it is encouraging somebody who has this implicit bias, even if it's against you, trying to, and not because it's our job to educate, but if it's a person we want to make a bridge with for some reason, right? Then the negotiation moving forward has to be, hey, you're not less of a person because you had this preference, but I'd like to expand your world. Will you let me in?
Yeah.
And that's hard because when it's against you, you're kind of like, wow, you're part of the problem. So for individuals who have like, a loved one or an extended loved one or a potential blended family where that might be somebody you want to make a bridge with, and you've got to let your desire for the outcome overall dictate your behavior, not the anger for the misjustice.
Which not everybody can do.
Nope. And I get that.
Yep.
Not everybody is ready for that.
Right. Not everybody has the bandwidth to be able to build that bridge.
No,
and
either
not
side.
everybody, and you can build that bridge, but you can't force anybody to walk across it.
Nope, you can lead a horse to water. But you can't make them drink. Yes, exactly.
I did try. Real life. So, Dene is the word for Navajo in their own language. It's what they call their language. That's what they call it. Means the people. So the people or man.
Yeah.
Now the title of the first episode is Monster Slayer, and I'm not going to talk about all of it, but that is part of the Navajo mythology.
Okay.
Is the Monster Slayer. There was a white shell woman who was beautiful and had supernatural powers because she was the daughter of the earth and sky. And she became pregnant. She conceived from sunbeams and had twins, who was slayer of alien gods and born from water. There are whole books of this information. It's really fascinating, but I really appreciated that the title of it was from their own mythology.
And that flows with the whole episode. Yeah.
Protecting artifacts from indigenous lands and indigenous people has a long and imperfect history. So in 1990, they passed legislation called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So all the way back in 1990, the federal government finally decided after too long that we should take care of this. Well, it wasn't until 2003 that they had one of their first large repatriations, and that was only because it was Santa Fe Art Gallery was selling Native American artifacts out of their back room.
What?
And they caught this gallery owner who was doing huge business. It was a teenager of legislation before they got there. In 2023, the Department of Interior finally got around to revising some of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act stipulations. So 33 years later, and then you have all of these museums who are finally starting to comply with this now fully adult legislation, who are deciding that either they may not have permission like they thought or they didn't care about before.
Right.
And now they're closing exhibits because they realize, we never did. In 2024, they're closing exhibits because they're like, we don't have permission to be displaying some of these things.
The irony being, communicate, people. Communicate.
For real.
Right? I think there's compassion on both sides, especially for our generations.
Right.
Now. I think, there's many tribes who, if contacted with the right intention to say, we're trying to make this right, we realize that the people before did not. Can we? May we? How can we include you?
And lots of museums, and lots of museums have done that, and they've worked with the Native people to make sure that they're getting back the things that they deserve to have back. I mean, the museums are frustrated because they spent a lot of money on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so they just see it as money wasted.
Right, like a sunk cost.
Right, exactly. And not like we spent all this money. If we'd known that we weren't going to be able to display this, we wouldn't, talk to them, talk to them about why or how you're going to revise your displays to make them more indicative of the actual history instead of, the victor's history. The FBI has a video on their website of a special agent who is Native American who works for the FBI. He is a special agent, and just talking about how he appreciates how the FBI works with indigenous cultures now. Because it is quite different than it used to be. And he lives in Oklahoma and is a member of the Choctaw Nation and is actually doing things with his work at the FBI that support his community.
That's
and
great.
it was just really, it was good. It was nice to have a heartwarming story.
Yeah,
and,
right.
You have Killers of the Flower Moon, which has similar sorts of themes, and how the Osage Nation is saying, things are much different now that the FBI is working with their police officers. I mean, it's just like a change in the whole attitude. And, the FBI, it's interesting and great in a lot of ways. And it's got some really sordid and awful history also. So, it's a real, they do good things. And then there's really some awful things that they shouldn't be doing as you think as a civilian, maybe they shouldn't be doing that, but maybe they should be. We don't know. It's hard. Yeah. It is hard. It's a challenging situation, right? I mean, law enforcement itself is fraught, and they're basically an arm of law enforcement.
For sure.
But they do have a much better relationship, the FBI, with the First Nations people now. So it's good. Next time, we're going to talk about High Potential. It airs on ABC and is streaming on Hulu about a single mom who is a cleaning lady at a police station, and she corrects a mistake in an investigation and becomes a consultant because she has a high potential for keen observation. It's so much fun, and I was watching it. I'm like, oh, this is the lady version of The Mentalist or Castle.
Yeah, right.
Which I just watched all of The Mentalist.
Oh, really?
And I'm watching Castle right now as my it is very much a procedural. You get a whole contained episode. It was the very end of the we're going to have an hour-long show that makes 20 some episodes a season.
Right.
It was the end of that.
Still fun.
It's so much fun because it's funny.
Yes, that's the thing I like. I get into, it's a soap opera. I get it. But I get into some of the inside jokes, the comedy, the callbacks. I love those. So good.
It's a little lighter. My husband makes a lot of fun of me. He's like, this is a silly show. And I'm like, it is a silly show.
That's the point. Thank you.
It's fun. They always find the murderer.
That's what we love about it.
I understand that it's fiction, but I like it. Anyway. Thank you so much for listening. We know you make a choice when you listen to us. We don't just come on the radio. We really appreciate that you spent some time with us. Tell a friend, because it's way more fun when you can listen with a friend. And until next time, be safe, be kind, and wash your hands.